So, have you personally ever tried traveling on a world passport?
I don't travel too often. I'm pretty much so busy at our office in Washington, D.C. that I wish I could travel more, actually. But I have traveled. I've used my world passport, and I generally bring both. We encourage passport holders if they have a national passport, but which isn't always the case. There's a billion people on the planet who don't have any identification document, right? But there's people who might not be able to get a national passport, like those Rohingya refugees, as I mentioned, even though they were born in Myanmar and lived there for many years. The government doesn't want to ID them or doesn't want them to have their citizenship. There's other groups like that, like the Badoon in United Arab Emirates, who, in fact, the Emirati government didn't even want to give them any kind of benefit as a citizen, so they bought them Comoros Island citizenship, believe it or not. So I don't know whether they'd ever go to the Comoros Islands for anything, but the point is, having to have a document to travel is kind of gets in the way of our rights. And go back to remind me your question, though. I want to get to this. There's a specific part of it that I wanted to reply to. Say it again.
Like, have you ever personally traveled on a world
travel?
passport?
Right. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So for example, when I went up to Canada, I presented both my world passport and my national passport. They didn't stamp either. They just let me in. But I presented them both. And then another time when I went, I actually decided I was going to ask the border official to stamp my world passport. And she said, well, what is this? So she said, I'm new here. I don't know what this is. So she looked on our computer. She noticed that World Service Authority is a nonprofit organization, legally incorporated in Washington, D.C. And she's like, oh, she said it's World Service Authority nonprofit. What I should have said is actually World Service Authority is the administrative branch of the world citizen government, because my passport actually says world government like this one. It's not the standard one that says world passport, because I am a world citizen, world government citizen, or citizen of the world citizen government. So I carry this one. But she's like, well, you know what? If I place a stamp in your world passport, I know you're going to a peace conference here, and that's why you're coming through. So I get that, but I could get in trouble for, as if the Canadian government is recognizing that nonprofit, and you haven't gone through, with me or with anyone here, all the steps to get that official recognition from the government or whatever. So she was afraid, really, to do that. And there's a lot of people who friends of mine or others who've used the World Passport, where they say sometimes the border official says, "Oh, I really agree with what you're doing, but I don't want to lose my job." And so sometimes it comes down to just the border official not being afraid. I did have a friend, though, who's a religions professor who teaches religious studies, who went to the same airport in Canada 2 weeks after me, and he did get an entry stamp from the government of Canada. It was, of course, a different official, and it was 2 weeks later. But why would he get a stamp in his world passport on that trip 2 weeks later, and I did not? This is why I said borders and border officials, it's completely arbitrary, subjective, and very frequently discriminatory, the practices that go on either there at the border or at consulates and embassies around the world, where people are treated not even as if they're human, but they're treated as are they worthy, so to speak? Do you have, are you coming as a business person to our country, and are you going to spend money? And it's almost like that's the basic concern. So I haven't traveled that much myself. I hope to, as maybe we get younger staff in, and I sort of become more like Garry Davis was, like the figurehead, or can go out and give speeches more, and other people will take over sort of the more day-to-day work at the office. But I can tell you that Garry Davis, this was the only passport that he had after he gave up his U.S. passport in 1948. He was traveling for about 5 years with no document, which was very difficult because they always kept arresting him because he had no documents. But then when he got the world passport, he was not as he was still arrested sometimes, but that was usually for sneaking into countries, going past the border guards and still sneaking in. They'd find him in the next day, and they'd put him in detention for violating their entry law or whatever. But it was much fewer times that he was arrested after, or detained at all after he had his world passport, because he had a document then that they would stamp. They're not going to stamp your hand. They want a document, a passport that they can stamp. And so for him, it was really a life-saving invention to create this passport that he could, as a stateless world citizen. I don't like to call him stateless. I like to call him world full, because he was full of love for the world and an understanding of the world. So he was a world full world citizen. So yeah, I mean, he was, out of anybody that I know, probably the person who used the passport the most because he had to. And there are a lot of refugees and stateless people who we've given documents to over the years who found that this is the difference between imprisonment and freedom. If they didn't have this, they might be detained or they might be stuck in a refugee camp simply because they have nothing else. So this is wrong. Why are we living in a world where we have the opportunity to help our fellow humans and then we don't? I mean, what kind of greed and selfishness exists in here and in here that causes that to happen? It makes me think, and wonder.
Exactly. And that reminds me of an anecdote. I believe this was in the documentary, The World is My Country, where Gary was stuck on the border of France and Germany for 3 months by a river. And they didn't allow him to, he left France because he wanted to enter into Germany, but they didn't allow him because he didn't have the documents, and France turned its back on him. So he was stuck over there, and he was having a look at the birds flying across the borders without any restrictions. And over here, he's stuck by that inhospitable river without any documents.
Exactly. What are the birds? Do they know something that we don't? Are they smarter than we are? A bird can go where it wants to, but humans can't. We are enchaining or imprisoning ourselves, both somewhat mentally, but even literally physically with building walls, between so-called borders. I mean, yeah, there are actual natural borders like rivers and mountains and oceans, right? But humans have created the technology, obviously, that help us to move beyond those. We've moved beyond those, for many, many years now. But so why do we keep still building these walls? And Garry Davis and the World Service Authority is about building unity and even building bridges to bring people together.
Coming to the next question, how actively do you engage with other World Federalist organizations like the Young World Federalists and Democracy Without Borders?
Sure. Well, Young World Federalists in particular, they are one of the co-sponsors of our World Citizen Club, Young World Federalists and Citizens for Global Solutions. So I'm delighted to be working with their team and in promoting those. And we're hoping that once the pandemic subsides, all students are back on campus in a safe way, students can meet and begin to restart these clubs. We had started the clubs literally right before the pandemic happened in the fall, right before. So we had started it and there was at least one club running, but then because of the pandemic, it made it so much harder. Everyone was stuck inside. You couldn't really meet other than over Zoom. So we might even start potentially some Zoom World Citizen clubs to get the ball rolling for this semester now until next semester. So we're working with them. I'm also a donor to the Young World Federalists, which I'm happy to do because I think they're bringing in people who may have never thought of or even considered the idea of world federation or world citizenship before, or may have thought about it, but not given it a second thought. And Democracy Without Borders, of course, has two main projects. The UN Parliamentary Assembly, United Nations Parliamentary Assembly, which is to have, not exactly a people's assembly, but an assembly of national representatives who are separate from, those maybe appointed by governments. These would be people to be voted on. They also have a World Citizens Initiative, which I think they chose to use the term World Citizens Initiative because of our work at World Service Authority for so many years promoting this idea of world citizenship, because that's an initiative that allows for people around the world to fill out almost like a what do you call it, a vote, a referendum on a global issue that they want to, whether it's climate change or poverty or some other issue, get enough signatures, send that to the Secretary General of the UN, and maybe the General Assembly will have to take up that issue. That's the goal of that initiative. I think that's a wonderful initiative. And so a lot of the World Federalist organizations, believe it or not, in the last 2 or 3 years have finally started working together, which I find amazing and incredible, but we can't stop there. It's so important. I mentioned this to somebody who works at a film and peace organization, that we not only do we need to bring all the World Federation and World Citizen organizations together, we need to also bring in human rights and peace and justice and climate justice or climate problem people, all these activists together. And it can't. We need to break out of our little rooms or silos, as they say, that are keeping us apart. If we can all work together with one bigger voice, there's nothing that we can't do. I mean, we can make the world in the kind of world that we want to have that will work for everybody. We just, once again, it's a question of choice. It's a question of choice and how we choose to identify ourselves, seeing ourselves as world citizens as well as world federalists or not. And so it's going to take this education, this grassroots movement, like the World Federalist movement or the World Citizen movement, to really dramatically make a change. But now is a perfect time in history. Not that there's never been a perfect, there's always a perfect time. But now, seeing with the pandemic and the threat of whether it's nuclear war or even, you never know, like an asteroid coming and hitting the planet, we need to start as human beings thinking beyond our little regional or state actors. We need to know that we as individual human beings have power, and if we come together as one humanity, we have even more power. I have a friend who likes to call the national leaders, she likes to call them misleaders, because oftentimes they mislead us to think that we need to fight a war, or that we need to not get along with another group of people, or that we need to institute some kind of financial or economic sanction or something that's really going to generally only hurt a local population and not really change what any of the government misleaders are going to do. So it's hard to find national leaders in this age who really have a global perspective. That's because the communities they live in, the citizenry, don't yet have that perspective. And that's the hard part, is getting to the people of the world. But for example, Citizens for Global Solutions has a roadmap for change. That is like a theory of change of how do we get from this, this idea of a world citizen government all the way back down to where we are now, and all the steps that we need to implement in between to make that happen. So, but we just have to, we have already started it. World Service Authority has been doing this for many years. Garry Davis wasn't a lifelong optimist. I'm an optimist that we can make this happen. Maybe not necessarily in my or your lifetime, where we have, like, you see in Star Trek or all the Star Trek shows, movies, that there's already a united Earth, and then they actually create a federation of planets out in the universe, right? So we have to first unite here before we can unite and maybe gracefully and graciously meet the other beings out there, the extraterrestrials, and get along with them. We need to get along with each other first. Right now, that we're all that we have. This pale blue dot, as Carl Sagan, the astrophysicist, said.
Absolutely agreed. And we have to continue the good fight. We can't just abandon it just because we're not getting maybe a lot of
Don't
support.
use the word fight. Don't use the word fight.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is kind of a pet peeve of mine, Omkaar, and maybe I shouldn't interrupt to say this, but it's not a fight. It's a struggle. It's an action. But when we as peacemakers and peace builders use terms that are violent, like fight, what are we doing? We're not making a change. So it is a struggle. It's a challenge, but which we can take on. But I don't like using terms like that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot for pointing that out as well. Yeah, so
it's hard, and I have to say it's hard to avoid those words because we are so brainwashed by the militarized nation-state system to use those terms. Fighting for a cause or whatever. No, I mean we want to be activists for a cause, or be like, Garry Davis never said I'm not for world citizenship. I am a world citizen. You have to be it.
Indeed. So we'll move on to a few questions on our hero Garry Davis. But before that, a question on economics. Do you believe that a universal non-country specific currency, like let's say Bitcoin or Ripple, can it achieve the economic objectives of a world federation?
I think that's going to have to be an underlying aspect to any world federation, that there be, in fact, Garry even created a world kilowatt bill. Which was the idea of linking money, and get me back on track because I might forget your question, but linking us human beings together by energy, because all money is mind or hand energy spent, right? But if we link the world on a global energy grid, that would mean that one part of the world is not going to want to bomb another part of the world, or they won't get their energy, they won't get their electricity the next day. So linking the world together through you might say like a world kilowatt cryptocurrency, or later on in his life, he created an idea of a global currency called the mundo, like, you know, the Latin word for world, like the euro, but the mundo, or I guess in English you'd call it the worldo. Anyway, and this is an idea of a currency that would be decentralized, that's not based upon the nation state central banks, which oftentimes are unfortunately required to somehow invest in military or military operations. So if we really want to have a divested world, divested from military and from human behaviors that only hurt ourselves or hurt the planet, we need to come up with some kind of global system that we all could trade upon, that is fair and equitable and just for everybody, and that is really linked to energy spent and not to, you know, gold, or, you know, what can you do? There's not much you can do with gold, right? I mean, most currencies aren't linked to gold anymore anyway. But I do see cryptocurrency as a way, or decentralized finance as a way for the global public to interact with each other separately from what the nation state wants to do. And I mean, a great example now is in El Salvador, where Bitcoin was enacted as a legal tender in the country. That shows that if national governments are willing to take that, you might say, initial risk to invest in their public, or for people having that crypto wallet, that allows some freedom to the individuals to choose how they want to interact, what they want to keep private, what they want to share, and to interact also in other kind of peaceful ways that this new blockchain technology is allowing us to do, where there's a ledger, and so you can really see what people are doing. Where if there's no ledger, like what secret departments of national governments are doing, you can't necessarily know how much money is being printed for them to go on, you know, deadly missions of, you know, whatever they're doing around the world. It's too secretive. Whereas a ledger, it's open; everyone should be able to see that. So that's the power of blockchain. But I don't think, you know, I wouldn't necessarily name or defame any one currency, but just to simply say whatever cryptocurrency or crypto project we move to, it has to be sustainable. It cannot use a lot of energy. It has to be proof at least proof of stake, not proof of work, or something beyond that, where it's somehow interactive in a trading way, where you're not, you know, losing anything, you're not wasting anything, but you're actually making value, you might say, just from here and here, from our head and our heart.
Well, that sounds very interesting, and I believe Garry was a visionary, because coming up with something of this sort and like having kilowatt as a unit of currency, that's a very great idea.
I think so.
And I believe this would click very well with the youth and like my generation, because they look forward to out of the box ideas like this. And maybe, I don't know, this is a personal opinion. Maybe you could consider reaching more in more outreach, and maybe turning this into a fandom sort of thing. Like, this is a cool thing to have, and you can maybe have advertisements and asking people, encouraging people to register for world passports and having documents like this.
Definitely. Oh, I agree. We need to. This is why I think it's so important that I'm appearing with you today, because I'm sure you have a youthful audience, working with like Nick Rowe and Esther McKay at the Young World Federalists. I think it's so important that we reach a new audience who will see the value of humans working together and creating government structures that work for us, the people. I mean, I like to say World Service Authority, service is our middle name, and all government, which it is, so all government should be of service to us. Why do we have government unless it's serving us? Government should not be there to force us to kill each other or to kill the earth, but it does right now. So we need a different kind of human government, and that's what world citizen government is about, or even world democratic, world federal government.
So coming to Garry Davis, do you think we can draw a parallel between him and Mahatma Gandhi? Please do elaborate on that.
Sure. Well, so I would suggest, first of all, that, Gandhi was a peacemaker, even though he wasn't a pacifist. I mean, he was an activist. Garry Davis was a peacemaker, but also an activist. And one thing that came to me as I was thinking about this earlier tonight was Gandhi helped the people of India become free. And Garry spent his entire adult life to help humanity become free. That's really what, and to do it in a revolutionary but peaceful way. This is the kind of life's work that Garry did. This is the legacy that the World Citizen Government and World Service Authority continues to take those Gandhian satyagraha principles of having, a truth and trying to achieve that truth, but doing it in a loving way, doing it in a way where we can get along, where we can collaborate and cooperate, and not fight, but to have an interaction that is peaceful. That's, I think, the power was the power of Gandhi. I mean, him saying, be the kind of change that you want to see in the world, and I would say that that's true of Garry also.
Garry was very appreciated by the first Prime Minister of India, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Like, he visited India, I believe, in the 1950s or early 60s. I'm not exactly sure about the date. And yeah, he visited on a world passport. So
correct.
That's when he talked about this, and an article came out in one of the prominent news outlets of India, News 18. So that was written by Manu Chandra, who had the opportunity to talk to Mr. Davis during the International Chief Justices Conference in 2013 Lucknow. So that's when he's said to have said that he took Nehru's blessings for his struggle, and he handed him over a world passport also, which he very gladly accepted.
Yeah, and Nehru also said that the passport that Mahatma Gandhi would have carried would have been the world passport. Yeah, because even Gandhi said, "I'm not just trying to free the people of India. I'm trying to free the people of the world." It was a bigger view. Just like same as a lot of people, like whether it's Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, or other people who are really well known as activists for justice.
Mr. Gallup, you personally knew Mr. Davis and you worked with him very closely. Can you share a few anecdotes of your interaction with him?
Sure. First, I say, Omkaar, please call me David. That was one of the first things that when I met Garry Davis, he's like, David, call me Garry. So, and I think, I'm much more, I'm not a formal person, so David is perfectly fine. But Garry, one of my favorite stories about Garry, and I wrote our New Year's message about this, which relates back to India a little bit. But Garry told me the story once that he had two gurus in his life. There was a fellow named Dr. Natarajan, or Nataraja Guru, as he was known, who Garry met on a ship traveling back, I think, from England maybe to the United States. So they only had a short time, a few days to talk. But he said to Garry, one of these days, I really want you to come to Bangalore, South India, and meet with me. But in the meantime, because I know you're on your way back to the United States, sort of probably at that point being forcibly returned to the United States on that ship, he said, why don't you meet with my colleague and disciple, Harry Jacobson? So that was really Garry's first guru, was Harry Jacobson. And with him, Garry, for several months in the year, I think 1952, he worked with him in his machine shop, welding and making tools throughout the day in New Jersey. Garry and Harry would have these really deep conversations about life, about philosophy, about world citizenship, because this was already about 4 years after Garry had given up his citizenship, became world famous as quote unquote world citizen #1, is what the press would call him. And he was very devastated or disillusioned by the fact that there was now a Korean War going on in 1952. Why did all the work that I did in the late 1940s and early 50s, now it seems like it's what's happened to that? Bringing all these people together, thinking about how we could have a world citizen government, how we could bring humanity together, and then now there's another war going on, a war that once again could potentially be nuclear. So he was very saddened by this world situation. But Harry said to him, Garry, look, you're seeing the anger and frustration that you're having from viewing the world situation. If you don't like it, you have to do something. You have to personally be the change that you want to see in the world. Like Gandhi said, you have to enact that. You have to be that world citizen. And if you do, other people will follow, just like they did in the late 1940s. And almost 1 million people had registered with Garry back then through his registry, and then we've continued that through World Service Authority. And so that made him feel better that, look, taking action is useful, and he could continue to take action. Well, a few years later, he did finally make his way using his world passport to India, South India, and he met with Nataraja Guru. At this point, though, Garry was almost sort of exhausted. He had been in the spotlight, the world spotlight, for so many years, trying to educate the public about who we are, our identity first and foremost as humans, as world citizens. And he was kind of frustrated and tired. And Nataraja Guru said to Garry, look, Garry, you don't have to do anything. The universe and the world will go on even if you do nothing. Relax, be calm, don't do anything. And that was a big solace to Garry, who was suffering really still from post-traumatic stress from the war, from his brother's death, and from all the involvement that he had in trying to change the world. And people almost having a heavy weight, like Atlas, a weight on his shoulders of trying to save the world, and all these people almost demanding that he be the person that makes this happen, him alone. So it was nice to have that thought from the guru saying, don't do anything. That was good. So it was, what I love about Garry is he studied Advaita Vedanta, the unity within the self and within the whole, right? So Eastern and Indian philosophy. And so he had two gurus from sort of geodialectic opposites. One who said, you better do something, Garry, you better be that change. And one who said, you don't have to do anything. So one who told him to do or to act, and one who said, don't act. So that was a fun and interesting story that Garry told me about his two different gurus. You can read more about it in my most recent blog on the World Service Authority website. Garry also, just the power of the guru, Garry would always tell me about this idea of holistic thinking, or ethical thinking of an ethical holistic framework for the world. And he talked about how, and he mentions this story in My Country is the World, his memoir, about how he and the guru Nataraja Guru, were sitting on a rock by a big pond. And the guru had sort of these testing philosophical questions to question Garry, to test him, so to speak, and his understanding or holistic view of the world. So the guru said, Garry, what is under that lily pad on there that's in the pond? And Garry, scratched his chin, scratched his head, and said, well, nothing. And the guru said, yes, Garry, you're right. There is nothing under that lily pad, because scientifically, if you there's something called surface tension, and if you lift up the lily pad, there's no water on it. It's dry because it's really like sitting right on top of the water. So Garry had to quickly think about the holistic framework of where that leaf is sitting on the pond, and what was the guru actually asking. But so it was an experience of learning about what it is to think holistically. And that kind of thought helped Garry Davis later on in all of his actions to promote world citizenship and world government, to how we could take the world situation, move beyond all the differences, sort of transcend them to a higher coherence, a higher comprehension of who we are and what we have here, this beautiful planet, that if we stop fighting each other and fighting the earth, there's plenty of resources that we can use sustainably if we choose to do that.
And those are some really insightful anecdotes. And that brings me to the next question. Where can we get these books?
Well, so on World Service Authority's website, you can go to worldcitizen.gov.org/books, and you can find the books listed there. But if that's not easy for you, you can always go to Amazon.com, and they have all of Garry's books. He had, or most of his books, he had 10 books actually, and a few other smaller brochures and pamphlets. And some of them, I think, are also ebooks. You might be able to download them, on like a Kindle type reader or an e-reader. Yeah, so one of those two places.
That's great. I'll attach the link to the books as well for the perusal of our viewers. And
Thank you.
yeah, I should have said this earlier. You have a great T-shirt, and I believe
Oh,
that's
yeah,
also available on the World Services Authority.
it is. We have merchandise or merch on our website too, which is also right near the same link. I think for books is the merchandise that'll take you to our merchandise store. So we have other merchandise. Do I have? I don't know if I have my other. Oh yeah, I do have. We have what I call our classic logo. That's our old logo, which is similar to the new logo. It still has sort of the human, you might say, hugging or embracing the earth. Here, this is sort of a whole earth where you have the green representing maybe land and the blue representing water. And then you still have the human, though. The human may be a little bit smaller than the human here, taking up the whole thing and having the latitude and longitude lines. But very, very similar idea, but just, brought updated to the 21st century, you might say. Because this logo actually came from the World Citizenship Movement back in 1948.
That's cool.
Yeah, but we do have other merchandise too. We have canvas tote bags. We have caps and other things.
It's amazing.